bag of weed. Yeah, one Saturday morning. I miss my childhood, man. Saturday morning cartoons were a way of celebrating a few hours before you go to your friend's house or go to that sport at 12 p.m. that you hate. When school was wearing you down, you had cereal, toys, and Saturday morning cartoons. Saturdays, much like Friday night cartoons, were an event, and usually a rerun of new episodes from Friday nights. But we'll go over why Saturday mornings will never come back again in this lifetime.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
In the 1950s was when Saturday morning cartoons started to take shape. The cartoons were very limited as they were Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and at that time animation was to be made cheap and plentiful for kids who at the time would forget the episodes but also filled a time slot from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. The main course of action for Saturday morning cartoons was to, well, you guessed it,
Stars and horseshoes, clovers and blue moons, pots of golden rainbows, and the red balloons. Lucky Charms, the part of this good breakfast with 8 magical marshmallows.
sell toys and cereal and whatever the hell this is.
Hey, what you gonna do today, Marty?
I'm gonna call 976-7777. They're gonna tell me a great story every day.
You can say that for a decade it was doing just that, and at the time kids were getting engaged with the block and what it was selling. And in the 1960s, times were changing. Kids were on new trends, so Merry Melody cartoons were becoming a thing of the past. Pop music and superheroes were a part of the new line of cartoons. Superhero cartoons such as Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Space Ghost took over the block after the demographic wanted more action cartoons. At the time of the 60s and 80s, since the rise of comics becoming TV series, a lot of live action series saw cartoon spin-offs, and most of them were short-lived due to audiences of kids only having fixations to superhero comic transitions. Hanna-Barbera cartoons managed to survive after Tom and Jerry with the Smurfs in the 80s, with a couple of main spin-offs such as a pup named Scooby-Doo, but then taste would change even more in the 90s when anime started to take over. Comic book superheroes were still a selling point, but Japanese anime was making its way to blocks, which drove a lot of problems in the foreseeable future.
On ABC Saturday mornings, this is your TV, ABC.
Because many channel syndicates wanted in on the Saturday morning craze, a lot of the Saturday morning cartoons had different channels to watch, which made it difficult to keep up with at the time. Be reminded, TiVo, On Demand, and TV Guide weren't around back then, so if you had cable, you were flipping through channels constantly. Fox Kids, which was changed to Foxbox, then 4Kids TV, had a bundle of Saban cartoons such as Power Rangers, Digimon, X-Men, Thundercats, just to name a few. Because of the competition 4Kids was getting, Fox Kids was home to Saban as Pokemon and Digimon became the war on the playgrounds at the time. WB, which became home to 4Kids lineups such as Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, as well as WB cartoons such as Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, and Freakazoid were also on the block. However, Saturday mornings was heavy on the anime craze, so it was hard for Disney's One Saturday Morning to compete with the Fox Kids, Foxbox, and WB dominance on airing anime. Disney's One Saturday Morning had shows that if you didn't have the Disney Channel at the time, you could watch on there, such as Doug, which was originally on Nickelodeon after its 4th season, Pepper Ann, Recess, Teacher's Pet, The Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, Buzz Lightyear Star Command, and so on. 4Kids, due to its success on Kids WB and after Saban's downfall, took over Fox Kids with Foxbox and had anime take over the whole block with Kirby Right Back At Ya, Sonic X, Shaman King, and One Piece before Funimation. You would think that Saturday morning cartoons would be fine with parents, but Saturday mornings were always controversial. Saturday morning cartoons existed due to the rise of not only broadcast commercialism, but also the rise of no-fault divorce in the 1970s and 80s. With the rise of helicopter parents, Saturday morning cartoons were seen as a threat to parental control over the influence of kids. Violence in cartoons was the biggest complaint to watchdog groups, and with that, EI was born in the 1990s and was heavily mandated in 1996. EI, also known as Educational and Informational, was implemented by the FCC to make sure that kids were learning on Saturday mornings and that cartoons were teaching kids moral lessons and educational information for 3 hours a week. This led to a lot of cartoons and anime to eventually be kicked off of slots on blocks to make sure that it fit with the FCC standards. Disney never had that problem, as most fit with the EI or
Illuminating television.
As most Disney cartoons, while entertaining in nature, were educational. Those who were born in the 90s and 2000s at the time remember that Saturday mornings were 5 hours of summer once a week.
5 hours of summer once a week. Yeah.
Television was an event. If you didn't have Comcast, DirecTV, or TiVo, you were stuck with cable. But after a while, that 5 hours of summer turned into something that needed to be productive according to parents and government officials. Because no-fault divorce laws were changing along with helicopter parenting after Columbine, kids were needing more social activities. That meant every morning kids would go on an extracurricular activity and parents had to get more active. By the time cable came out and became widely available along with networks being able to go against EI, Saturday morning blocks became obsolete, as well as home video and DVD becoming a more popular medium to use instead of having to wait Saturday to watch a rerun or a new episode. Video games also became a grave pit to Saturday mornings because Nintendo and Sony were making video games that were better with quality. Why would any kid want to wake up to watch cartoons when they can play video games? Plus, with many video games being turned into cartoons, it was only a matter of time before the internet would bury Saturday mornings, making every block obsolete. These Saturday morning blocks were a time where you were sold sugary cereal, action figures, and watch good cartoons. Many comic strips were transferred over to cartoons to keep themselves relevant to the modern day youth, as most kids didn't read comic strips, let alone a newspaper, unless their parents did. On top of that, most superhero comics were timeless classics as their own standalone series on Saturday morning blocks. It was a time where kids were becoming consumers to products their parents were pretty much haggled to buy. Was it good or bad? Most of us were not conscious enough to realize it until we were older, but baby boomers to millennials would still reminisce about a childhood that will never come back. Saturday mornings were comforting because Friday was when most kids would stay up past their 9 p.m. curfew. Then on Saturday, when you had sugary breakfast cereal, then watch cartoons, then play with your friends or whatever you did on a Saturday morning. Generations of kids with TikTok and social media will never understand the joys of Saturday morning cartoons and never will. But for the lucky few of us that knew about the blocks, reminisce about it at work, about a childhood we went back. I think that's why we have checkered past now. A simpler time and a more commercialized time for every kid involved.
Welcome back to Disney's One Saturday Morning.